Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for December 27th, 2021. Well, as we head toward a new year, which appears to be one which will be quite tumultuous, at least at the beginning, we're going through a period where there is a consistent pattern of lying and fabrication coming from the Western political media and political officials aimed at war and austerity, convincing you that we have to be willing to accept less and less so that there can be, quote, security and stability in the world. Now, let me remind you something. Do you remember the 1970s with the two oil hoaxes? Kissinger's oil hoax from 1973, and then at the end of the decade, James Schlesinger's energy hoax, where supposedly there were boycotts of shipping oil to the West from Arab countries and the prices skyrocketed. Where did that money go? It went into the Western banks that controlled people such as Kissinger and the Rockefeller networks. Now, we're seeing the same kind of manipulation today with skyrocketing energy prices, with hyperinflation overall of food prices and other necessities. And this is all being done in conjunction with the Green New Deal and with strategic provocations against Russia and China. Now, Putin talked about this in his year-end press conference. I want to give you a sense of what he said because he exposed the fraud of blaming Russia for gas shortages in Europe. This is one of the talking points of the West, that you shouldn't allow Nord Stream 2 to go through because this will give Russia top-down control over energy supplies in Europe, and Russia can manipulate those energy supplies to control the policies of governments. Western media and U.S. officials are claiming Russia is withholding gas shipments today to Germany and Europe. And they're saying, therefore, we should not allow a certification of Nord Stream 2 because this will just make things worse. Now, typical of this is a man that Donald Trump once famously called Lion Ted. Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, who has introduced a bill which will be voted on in January by a deal he made with Chuck Schumer that would allow more sanctions to be placed on Nord Stream 2 oil and gas. He called it a major victory. Well, as is often the case, Ted Cruz is willing to lie for the sake of his short-term political goals. And in this case, it's for a military buildup in Europe against an alleged Russian threat. Now, what Putin said is that not only is Russia not withholding gas, but it's delivering the gas in fulfilling its contracts. But it's German firms which are withholding the gas. And what are they doing? They're taking the cheap gas they get from contracts with Gazprom, the Russian firm, and they're delivering them to Poland and Ukraine at higher prices. So they're on the one side saying that they're not getting the gas, and then they're profiting from it by selling it to Poland and Ukraine. This then pushes up the gas price in Europe, especially at the Rotterdam spot market, where speculators are taking the so-called shortages and driving the prices up. Now, Putin in his press conference described this as disgusting, totally out of line. And he said consumers in Europe and Germany should know what is really happening and ask officials to clarify their stance. Now, while Russia is fulfilling its contract, supplying natural gas to Europe, U.S. companies have withdrawn over 14 tons of natural gas from Europe, selling it in more profitable markets in Asia. So here we see a perfect example of how these crises are manipulated and how they unfold and how costly and dangerous they can be. This, on the one side, plays into the Ukraine crisis because Ukraine is claiming that if the Nord Stream 2 goes through, they'll be cut off from gas supplies which come through Ukraine from Russia. And so therefore, Nord Stream 2 should be shut down. Meanwhile, utility prices keep climbing in Europe. And it's been a very cold winter so far, despite all the lies coming from the green publications, which claim global warming is melting the ice caps and flooding the islands, and pretty soon New York City and Miami Beach will be underwater. Don't believe it. But what's happening is utility prices keep climbing in Europe in this cold weather. In Germany, in November, utility prices were 40% higher this year than in November 2020. In Italy, it was announced over the weekend that electric bills will increase by 50% in January and gas bills by 40%. Now, this has nothing to do with limits to supply. It has to do with the merger of three frauds, which I'll get to in a moment. But let me just complete the picture in Germany. 3 of the remaining nuclear plants in operation will be shut down, decoupled from the electricity grid in early January of this year. And by the end of the year, the remaining 3 plants will be decoupled and shut down. These 6 plants presently produce 14% of the electricity consumed in Germany. They cannot be replaced by renewables. There's not enough solar power or wind power to make up the difference. So how is it going to be replaced? By burning fossil fuels, including coal. Now, this exposes the fraud of the Green New Deal. Supposedly, fossil fuels are causing the expansion of carbon dioxide and therefore trapping heat in the atmosphere, leading to global warming. And yet, by getting rid of nuclear power, they're going to be increasing the amounts of fossil fuels that have to be burned to produce energy. Now, once they stop that use of fossil fuels, there'll be shortages, systemic shortages throughout the most advanced economies of the world. That's where the Green New Deal is going. So let me get to this point of how you have the merger of 3 frauds which are creating an extreme crisis for the transatlantic countries. First of all, you have the fraud of the Russian threat to invade Ukraine. Putin is saying he wants to have a dialogue, a discussion, and that there are necessary measures that have to be taken for Russian security. And the basis for this, as we've reported extensively, is not that Putin is trying to dictate policy to nations. He's making a simple point. If you keep moving nuclear weapons closer and closer to the Russian border and build up hostile forces, then you're putting an enormous pressure on Russia to respond to that. Because the countries doing this, namely the NATO countries and the United States and just the United Kingdom, have no friendly intention toward Russia. They see Russia as a competitor that must be defeated. The humiliation of the 90s after the fall of communism was not enough. Russia is building itself back, and that's seen as a threat by these Western powers, the financial and corporate elite. So they make up this story that Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine to justify the expansion of NATO eastward, after having promised that that would not happen. So Putin's asking for his security guarantees in writing, no further eastward expansion. And that he's being accused of trying to dictate like an authoritarian leader to these countries. Now, the second fraud is the idea that Europe will be blackmailed by Russia if the Nord Stream 2 goes through, that Russia will withhold oil and gas for the sake of freezing Europe to get favorable agreements. There's nothing in the history of Gazprom over the last 30 years that shows that it would it would not fulfill its contracts. And as you can see from this whole question of the Germans selling the Russian gas to Poland and Ukraine for profit, it's the German firms, not Russia, that are responsible for driving up gas prices. And the third fraud is the whole green policy overall. The attack against fossil fuels, the effort to withhold credit for new exploration, to shut down companies that have a carbon footprint, which as a result are driving up overall energy costs. So this is what you should think about when you read stories about the aggressive, malign intent of Russia, the danger of fossil fuels and coal, and the fact that we have to therefore prepare for war and be willing to accept austerity in the form of lack of electricity because of the evil, nasty Russians. In fact, it's the corporate cartels of the West, the transatlantic, taking their direction largely from think tanks and the corporate leadership in London, Washington, and Wall Street that's threatening your future. And the sooner people figure that out and act against it, the safer we'll be coming into the year 2022. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.